In today's episode, we hear from Lisa Morgan, an autistic social worker and life coach. She is also a board-certified autism specialist, specializing in the area of autism and suicide prevention.
Hello, welcome to a new episode of Reach. Today's episode, we'll be discussing suicide. So, among the autism community, these are statistics pulled from the National Autism Association, as well as some information from JAMA, which I believe is the Journal of American Medical Association. Research studies suggest autistic youth and adults estimated 2 to 7 times higher in suicide risk than youth who do not have autism. Children with autism experience suicidality at a younger age than their peers without autism. Females on the spectrum, it's estimated about 1 in 5. Within that group of those who are suicidality, those with ADHD had a higher rate, which is estimated about 1 in 10 had attempted suicide. 1 in 5 females who have autism and ADHD have attempted suicide at least once. And the highest rate is estimated, according to a 2021 article, are those who are aged 30 to 39 years of age.
Talk about heartbreaking statistics as a female who is in her 30s on the autism spectrum, to hear that these statistics are happening, the fact that even one person has attempted suicide and they happen to have autism and or ADHD, I mean, that's one person too many. And if you are on the autism spectrum, or if you have any, neurodivergency, I just want to say thank you for being here, because your presence matters so much more than anything.
Every life matters. And if you know someone who may be considering, please do whatever you can to support them and seek help. And contact the U.S. Suicide Crisis Lifeline. I know me personally, I fall in that 30 to 39 range myself, and it's scary, and yet there's so many contributing factors that unfortunately make it very plausible and sad.
Working in a field where I work with autistic people for a living, it really breaks my heart to hear that is even considered a thought. What could happen that can contribute to someone wanting to take their own life?
All the risk factors of the general population, but autistic people do have some unique risk factors as well. Some of them are co-occurring psychiatric disorders like anxiety and depression. There's masking. It has been proven but research has shown masking has a negative effect on autistic people's mental health and can cause suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Let's see, there's social communication difficulties, number of unmet support needs, and that can be anything from housing to relationships to daily living skills to job, employment. I mean, just so many, and they all kind of stack up on top of each other as far as being unmet. And a diagnosis of autism actually is a risk factor of suicide. So just getting that diagnosis, being diagnosed later in life, being female, autism burnout, thwarted belonging, perceived burdensomeness. There's a lot of things that are risk factors for autistic people.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences?
So I was a teacher most of my adult life until on June 24th, 2015, my husband of 30 years died by suicide. And what brought me into this, full-time advocacy for autistic people around crisis supports and suicide prevention was everything that I went through the night we found him, from the first responders who were all there to help, but none of it was really supportive as far as I could tell or feel. Even though they were all kind, and they were all there to support me, I felt unsupported because I'm autistic and it was just different. And then all the stuff that happened in the year afterwards, as far as settling my husband's estate and just living without him, and just all the people I had to deal with, coroners, people fixing my house up so I could live in it again, just insurance people, just everybody seemed to be on a different page than I was. And it was very frustrating, very confusing. So I wrote my first book and started getting into developing resources specifically for autistic people, so professionals could use these resources to help autistic people in crisis, and really know how to support them in a way that they felt supported.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book that you wrote?
Yeah, it's called Living Through Suicide Loss with an Autism Spectrum Disorder. And it basically tells the story. It starts on June 24th, 2015, the night we found him, and just tells the whole story of the first responders and basically the first year of what I went through. And it gives what would help. So I tell part of the story and I say what would help in this situation is, and then there's that, and then I tell more of the story. And so that was the first book I wrote. And then I also wrote Living with PTSD on the Autism Spectrum Disorder, because I ended up with PTSD from that night. And in 2017, so 2 years later, I founded the Autism and Suicide Prevention Work Group, and we started making autism-specific resources that now are being used by crisis center workers and all kinds of professionals, and they've been translated into 2 languages, possibly a third. So there's other countries that are using it, and it's really geared towards anyone who's supporting an autistic person. It can help them with communicating with them, knowing how to support them in a way that they can feel supported.
Suicide is such a heavy topic, and I'm so curious to know from our end, or from my end at least, you mentioned some of the resources that are being used. I'm curious to know a little bit about what these resources are and where our listeners can find them.
They can find them on my website, which is autismcrisissupport.com. They're all in there. And then the first one, the Crisis Toolkit, is the one that was being translated. And that's written originally for crisis center workers, because a lot of autistic people have a difficult time texting crisis lines, calling crisis lines. The support that they receive is they feel unsupported. And so it was originally written for crisis center workers. So it talks about communicating with them, how to support them, how autistic people typically think differently than non-autistic people. So it really covers a lot, how to support them. The fact that, I had some feedback from other autistic people when writing that, and just being given positive coping skills. They need to know why, because it felt dismissal, like go listen to music or go have a warm drink of milk or something, just felt dismissive. So always telling why is helpful for autistic people in crisis. The fact that they have a rejection of skills and may not be able to listen to a lot of words at that time, and may not be able to make eye contact, where they might be able to if they're not in crisis, different things like that. And then we have a resource that takes the warning signs of suicide for the general population and shows considerations to take when using those with autistic people, because some of those are self-care techniques for autistic people, like withdrawing. A lot of people withdraw to regulate. Self-care. That's a warning sign of suicide for the general population, as well as autistic people. It can be both. So that resource does that. And then we have a resource that is a proposed set of warning signs of suicide for autistic people. And that's very different than the warning signs of suicide for the general population. And then the last resource we have is trying to, this resource was particularly to use 988 successfully. So what to expect, what to do if you have a bad call, some feedback you can give, reasons to call 988, what will happen if you say you're suicidal, just things like that are in that resource. And hopefully that resource will help people to be able to reach out to 988 for support, which is the national crisis line right now.
Now, when they reach out for the crisis line, do they have to identify as autistic to get that catered response, or is it been incorporated into the general response?
Well, there is no really response right now. Where the work group is also working towards that. We're working with 988 and working towards getting that. But right now, the resource from the work group is just for autistic people to use. Like, okay, you're going to be prompted for this. You're going to have to answer a couple questions. They're going to, you may not get somebody right away. A lot of autistic people have had crisis center workers hang up on them because their processing is slow and they think they're done the call. What happens, just kind of giving autistic people some expectations of what happens, what may happen if the call goes wrong, how to have a successful call. That's what that resource is for. It's not, we haven't worked with 988 to do that. So 988 is just right now doesn't have anything for autistic people.
Would you recommend them go more specifically towards your website and any other resources instead of 988?
No, if you need to call 988, please call 988. If you're an autistic person in crisis, always try to reach out for help. There's other, go to my website and find those resources as well. That could help. If you have a mental health provider, you can share those resources with them. But if you're in crisis, do what you need to do to help yourself, definitely. 988 has been successful for autistic people and it hasn't been successful for autistic people. So it really depends on who you get on the other end. I've called 988, I've texted 988 a couple times. I have disclosed my diagnosis once. But really it's trying to make a connection with somebody. And if that helps, go ahead, you should do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As someone who works with autistic youth and autistic teenagers for a living, one of the things that I run into, and also as an autistic person who has taught pretty heavy subjects before, I really try to break down the communication as much as possible and trying to make sure that they're fully understanding what's going on. And that being said, one of the questions that I have is, how important is it that a counselor have like specialized training in autism when treating someone with depression or suicidal ideation?
Well, I mean, it's really important because when somebody's reaching out for help, they don't really have a lot of capacity to advocate for themselves. So if the crisis center worker or other mental health care provider, if they can know about autism ahead of time and what to do and what not to do, to know that slow processing speed is correlated to anxiety. So the higher the anxiety, the slower the processing speed, that, skills, autistic people can lose skills that they already have. They may have a difficult time communicating. They may lose the ability to communicate. They may need to draw or, text emojis that mean that something. So it's so important. There are autistic people who have gone to ERs just to be sent home because they don't look like suicidal. Sometimes everything happens on the inside for autistic people. So if somebody who is autistic and they're autistic and they say they're suicidal and they're saying it calmly, that's an emergent situation. So to know that is going to be extremely important when supporting an autistic person with suicide. Everything may be happening internally for them. And there's a lot of misunderstandings that happen for autistic people who reach out for help, who don't show that outward presentation that people are normally looking for. So the words have to have much more weight and much more meaning for autistic people. And it's important that the professionals know that ahead of time.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
you know, for me as someone who's been in this field for a while, um, I've seen that unfortunately happen.
Mhm.
I worked with a young male at the time he was adolescent and he was Baker acted and he did show signs of suicidal ideation. And then I remember that some of that continued even post Baker acting. And there were people who worked with him that just thought, oh, he's just saying that for attention. He's just
Yeah.
saying that. And that's not it.
No, it's not it. It's not it at all. If somebody who's autistic says they're suicidal, first of all, autistic people tend to be blatantly honest and very literal. And we get in trouble for that in communication, and then we get ignored when we're in crisis.
It's that much bigger of a reason why autistic people tend to have PTSD, you know, because we're forcing ourselves to have to shut down when we're trying to say, I need help, please help me, because something is very, very wrong.
Yeah.
And when someone says, oh, like, you know, saying, oh, they're just saying that for attention, they're feeling sorry for themselves. What do you feel that we can do, like as a community, as advocates, to do better for not only autistic people, but also to help 988 be better for us as well?
Well, there needs to be training, and there needs to be, we're always, the work group's always looking to disseminate our resources, get them out there, get them in the hands of the people that are supporting autistic people. If autistic people can, if they're in a place where they can advocate for themselves, like when I'm in crisis, I need to send you emojis because I lose the ability to communicate. If they can do that preemptively, and be proactive about it, that could be helpful. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of people in crisis don't, they're working with support people who they've never met before and who aren't used to working with autistic people. So there's knowing ahead of time, which would be those resources and training. Working with 988 right now to get some of that in place, because that's going to be very, very important.
How beneficial would it be to have like some type of emergency card or something on the person where they have a contact that can help advocate for their safety and understands their communication style?
Yes, that is a very important idea. I think I do have that in my book, is to have a card ready. I wish I had one that night. Because yeah, when you're so dysregulated and so highly anxious and you can't communicate that to other people, having that card, yeah, with your needs, how you can be supported, someone to call, like you said, would be very helpful.
What age group do you find that where this starts to become a greater issue, like a higher escalation percentage of, say, ideation or occurrences?
Well, Kennedy Krieger did a study this past April in 2024, and they found that the suicidal ideation was starting in children younger than 8 years old.
My eyes are wide open because at 8 years old, that's a child.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yep.
a child. Like, and again, I work with children, so this breaks me because children, whether they have autism or not, shouldn't be going through that at all.
Right. But we all know whether, no matter when we were diagnosed. So I was diagnosed when I was 48. My whole childhood was trying to belong. you know
Exactly.
that's pretty much everybody's history who's autistic, whether they were diagnosed young or not, is trying to belong, and thwarted belonging is a suicide risk factor.
Yep.
Speaking of risk factors, I wanted to ask, you just mentioned one very, very important risk factors, or one of the most important risk factors, but what are some other risk factors that, people need to know when it comes to suicidal ideation for autistic youth, adults, anybody on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, it's like I had said before, it's co-occurring psychiatric conditions. There's unmet support needs, social communication, masking is one, autism burnout, diagnosed later in life, female, thwarted belonging, perceived burdensomeness. There's a lot. And what we don't know, which I would love to know, is what the protective factors are. Because what is unfortunate for us, the protective factors for the general population are marriage, higher education, relationships, all the things that autistic people struggle with, that are risk factors for autistic people. The protective factors for non-autistic people tend to be part of the risk factors for autistic people. So what are the protective factors for autistic people? There's no real good research. There's some out of Australia that show, if we can belong, if we can be accepted for who we are, so we don't have to mask. Because remember, that's has a negative impact on our mental health. So if autistic people can just be accepted and be autistic in today's society, and understand, if general society can understand what it's like to have the lights so bright and the sounds pierce your ears, and not be able to understand language because it's nuanced and it's slang and it's figurative, and we're very literal minded, and we're not being rude, we're just being honest, and everything that goes into trying to fit into society. If they would just accept us for who we are, I think a lot of that perceived burdensome would go away, thwarted belonging would go away, the feeling that we have to mask our autism would go away. I think a lot of the risk factors would go away, or at least lessen for us.
Absolutely.
I agree. We definitely need a world that fosters more understanding, and for the rest of the world to arguably meet us halfway when it comes to communication, because we spend so much of our lives trying to be something that we're not, where we are going above and beyond that halfway mark, that it needs to come the other way.
Yes.
And masking is such a huge factor for something like this, where it arguably makes someone be something they're not, to the point where their inner selves are so squashed or forgotten that they don't know who they are anymore.
Or they never were developed, because my recollection is I was, realized that I didn't belong in first grade. I have a distinct memory in the schoolyard at recess. And so I believe I started looking at what everybody else was doing and tried to follow what they were doing. And that was the beginning of masking for me. So I've been masking since I was like 6 years old. So there could be an underdeveloped sense of self, or not even developing a sense of self, because I've spent my whole life, I'm 61 right now, trying to be someone who could fit in and other people might like. So yeah, it might not even be a sense of self.
Yeah, or a fractured one.
Or a fractured one. Yeah.
And I'm still piecing myself together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like I've said this before and I will say it again. We as autistic people have been taught to fit into society and mold and sort of like behave the same way as our neurotypical counterparts. But where is the teaching for neurotypical people to learn to accept us and to adapt to us, and understand our behaviors and understand what we go through? Because, as you stated, Lisa, these risk factors would either decrease significantly or completely disappear if we had a more accepting world.
I agree with you.
I'm curious to know from your side too, what would you say are some of the warning signs that you think caregivers or anybody that, a person is close to should look for when it comes to suicidal ideation?
Well, what the resource warnings, the proposed set of warning signs of suicide for autistic people, shows a increase or decrease from baseline. So kind of have to know the person in order for that to work, but it still works if you just are, supporting somebody you just met. It's because you can find out by asking other people. It's, are they withdrawing more and are still not regulated? Depressed, anxiousness, is there a difference in anxiety level? There's, some autistic people have a special interest of suicide, suicide of actors or politicians or other, they could have a special interest, and making sure that someone's monitoring that so it doesn't turn into their own um, suicidal ideation. Hopelessness was the only one that was transferred over from the general population. There's 10 of them, and it's usually just it is an increase or decrease from baseline.
Now,
Is loss of sleep associated with that too?
Sleep is part of the general population. Sleep is listed in there according to the ones we took off the American Association of Suicidology's website. And sleep issues are always an issue for autistic people too, but it's not one of the ones that are listed in the toolkit.
how much of a factor has the internet been?
Well, I think a lot of autistic people have their social connections on the internet. And so that helps, especially the autistic people, who have diagnosed later in life, who have no support network at all. They have, support groups they can utilize online. And that is sometimes once a month meeting is all the time they socialize in their whole life. So the internet is good as far as socializing. When I was bullied as a kid, I could go home and not worry about it till the next day. And the weekends I had 2 days off. But yeah, these kids, they don't have any time off from it if they look at the social media. That's definitely, for youth, definitely a difficult thing, I can only surmise. Ultimately, being accepted for who we are as a person is the solution, because the reason why the suicide rate is so high, most of those risk factors are not belonging in today's society in one way or another.
Yeah, whether it's socially, domestically, career-wise, because I'm sure unemployment is an absolute huge factor as well, especially for adults.
And working under, your abilities, just, socially getting along with coworkers, understanding what, your boss wants. Just, there's so many levels. And then the environment in a workplace can be difficult for autistic people.
What can we do to help teach autistic acceptance to non-autistic people? It's something that like we try to teach, or I try to teach like my clients, but I want to be able to go up to somebody and talk to them about autistic acceptance. I want people to be able to do that. So that being said, from your perspective, Lisa, how would you teach autistic acceptance and really just trying to get through to them that, this is what it is and it's okay?
Yeah. So as a teacher, I always used to start, when I was in the classroom, start where my students were. And so when I'm teaching training or a presentation, and I come on this subject, I start where I know people can understand. So I start with a cat and a dog. And I explain that, everyone knows a cat and everyone knows a dog, and everyone knows dogs are very social, and, they want attention and they have a lot of needs. And cats are less social and they are more toward themselves and they're a little more introverted. And when everyone can agree on that, I say, okay, picture a doggy daycare center where there's 15 dogs and they're outside and they're playing, and you put a cat in there. How is the cat going to feel at the whole day, and how dysregulated is that cat going to be at the end of the day? And that's really kind of what happens with an autistic person goes into a school or a workplace that is, in the analogy, the doggy daycare is loud, their dogs are barking, they're playing with each other, and they're bigger, and it's just chaos for the cat. where a cat would need a different kind of environment and atmosphere. And if they had to stay at a doggy day, they would need accommodations. That really kind of helps people to understand, oh, there's nothing wrong with a cat. They're just different. And there's nothing wrong with a dog. They're just different. And then translate it into, okay, well, an autistic person is, of course, in this analogy, the cat, and non-autistic people are, and there's nothing wrong with us. We're just different. We have different needs. We have different sensitivities. We just have different, a different way of being, and there's nothing wrong with that. And people usually understand that analogy.
It's a very beautiful one.
It is a really, really great one.
Thanks.
Lisa, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast with us today. This was really such a great conversation to have. I know it was very heavy, but at the same time, I really just appreciate, your perspective and you coming in and speaking about this. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
I just want to say that you are both so kind and so friendly, and I've really enjoyed talking with you today. I really have.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you. And for the listeners, just a reminder, if you know anyone who may be considering ideation or suicidal thoughts or even attempting, please reach out to 988 or Lisa's website at
autismcrisissupport.com.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode. The next episode will be all about social advice. Thank you so much.